The US is panicking over China's new megaports in South America. And once you see what China just built, you'll understand why. While America watched, China quietly constructed a network of deep-water ports spanning 2 oceans and an entire continent. These aren't just ports, they're the infrastructure backbone of a parallel global shipping system that's rewriting how world trade flows. And it all started with one impossible project on Peru's Pacific coast that changed everything. But before we get to how this network threatens to reshape global power, you need to see where it all began. The game changer, Chancay Port, Peru. Imagine building South America's most advanced megaport in a location where no port should exist. That's exactly what China did with Chancay. 60 miles north of Lima, on a stretch of Peruvian coastline that had been nothing but a sleepy fishing village for centuries, China poured $3.6 billion into creating something that defied every expectation. This wasn't an upgrade of existing infrastructure. This was building a megaport from absolute scratch on one of the most challenging coastlines in the world. The technical specs alone are staggering. Chancay features a draft depth of nearly 59 feet deep, enough to handle the largest container ships on the planet. 15 berths stretch along the coastline, equipped with automated cranes that can load and unload vessels faster than any other port in South America. The facility is designed to handle 1 million 20-foot equivalent container units in its first phase. But here's where it gets really impressive. At full completion, Chancay will process 2.4 million containers annually, and China's COSCO Shipping owns 60% of it, giving them direct control over operations. But the engineering challenge wasn't just about building big. Peru's Pacific coast sits on one of the most seismically active zones on Earth. The Nazca Plate constantly grinds beneath the South American plate, triggering earthquakes that have devastated this region for millennia. Building a port here meant engineering foundations that could withstand massive seismic events while supporting cranes weighing hundreds of tons. Chinese engineers drove foundation piles deeper than anyone thought possible, creating a structure that's essentially earthquake-proof. The terrain itself fought them at every step, steep cliffs dropping into the ocean, unstable soil conditions, and constant Pacific swells that would have stopped most construction projects before they started. Then there's what this port actually does to shipping routes. For decades, cargo traveling between South America and Asia had one option: sail north through the Panama Canal, cross the Pacific, and arrive in Shanghai after roughly 45 days at sea. Chancay just cut that time in half. Ships now sail directly west from Peru, reaching Shanghai in just 23 days. No canal fees, no waiting in line with hundreds of other vessels. No constraints on ship size, just open ocean and the fastest route between 2 continents. But here's what really matters. Peru's economy is now reorienting toward Asia in ways that seemed impossible just 5 years ago. Copper, fish meal, agricultural products, everything Peru exports can now reach Chinese markets faster and cheaper than ever before. And it's not just Peru. Chancay is positioned to become the redistribution hub for the entire South American west coast. Cargo from Chile, Ecuador, and Colombia can flow through Chancay and reach Asia in record time. China didn't just build a port. They built the linchpin of Pacific trade that puts them at the center of every cargo route between South America and Asia. But Chancay was just the beginning, because while everyone focused on Peru's Pacific coast, China was building something equally important on the Atlantic side. The Atlantic Anchor, TCP, Port of Paranaguá, Brazil. While Chancay was capturing headlines, China Merchants Port was quietly taking control of Brazil's most strategic export corridor. The Port of Paranaguá sits in Paraná state, handling 2.5 million 20-foot equivalent containers every year. China didn't just invest here, they took operational control of the terminal that sits at the heart of South America's agricultural powerhouse. The engineering here matches anything in Shanghai. Chinese engineers dredged channels deep enough for post-Panamax vessels, the massive container ships too large for the Panama Canal. They built berthing infrastructure that handles these giants fully loaded, with automated cranes and integrated software systems, optimizing every movement. But the technical achievement isn't what makes this port strategically crucial. Brazil exports more soybeans, corn, and beef than almost anywhere on Earth. And China is the biggest buyer. By controlling Paranaguá, Chinese operators manage loading schedules, shipping data, and vessel priority. When Chinese companies control both the terminal and the shipping lines, they see everything: production volumes, pricing trends, logistics bottlenecks, before anyone else does. The location gives China direct Atlantic access. Brazilian agricultural exports that once shipped through multiple intermediaries now flow directly onto Chinese vessels from Chinese-controlled terminals. The entire supply chain from Brazilian farm to Chinese consumer runs through infrastructure that China owns and operates. As global food demand explodes and climate change disrupts traditional agricultural zones, Brazil's farmland becomes increasingly critical. China saw this decades ago and positioned themselves at the exact choke point where those exports leave South America. They didn't just secure their food supply, they guaranteed that South America's agricultural exports flow through Chinese hands before reaching any market. But controlling South America's coasts wasn't enough, because China had plans for the Caribbean that would put them right in America's backyard. The Caribbean Gateway, Kingston Container Terminal, Jamaica. 90 miles from Miami, China just took control of the Caribbean's largest transshipment hub. China Merchants Port invested $1.4 billion into Kingston Freeport Terminal, and what they built there should terrify American strategists. This isn't some minor facility. Kingston processes cargo for the entire Caribbean region, and now Chinese operators control every container that moves through it. The natural harbor at Kingston is one of the deepest in the Western Hemisphere. Chinese engineers enhanced it even further, dredging to depths of nearly 60 feet and installing automated systems that rival anything in Asia. The terminal handles the largest container ships afloat, and its position makes it irreplaceable. Cargo from South America heading to North American markets flows through Kingston. Goods manufactured in Asia and destined for the Caribbean get redistributed here. It's the central node connecting 3 continents. But here's what makes this so strategic. Chinese operators now control shipping data for cargo moving between the Americas. They see what's being shipped, where it's going, and when it arrives. They manage the logistics that keep Caribbean economies functioning. And they've created an alternative route that completely bypasses the Panama Canal. Chinese vessels can now move between South and North America using their own infrastructure, with zero dependence on American-influenced shipping lanes. The facility also serves as China's intelligence gold mine. Every container processed generates data about trade flows, economic activity, and supply chain patterns across the Western Hemisphere. That information flows directly to Chinese logistics companies and, by extension, to Beijing. China didn't just invest in a Caribbean port. They positioned themselves at the exact intersection of American maritime commerce, and there's nothing the US can do about it. But Jamaica was only the beginning, because China's next move brought them even closer to American shores. The northern entry, Port of Mariel, Cuba. 90 miles from Florida, China built something that keeps Pentagon analysts awake at night. The Port of Mariel received $900 million in Chinese financing and construction expertise, transforming a secondary Cuban facility into a mega container terminal that operates with Chinese technology, Chinese equipment, and Chinese operational systems throughout. The scale is staggering. A 2,300-foot quay with depths of 46 feet allows the largest vessels to dock. The entire facility sits within a special development zone designed to attract manufacturing and logistics operations. But the technical specs aren't what worries Washington, it's the location. This is the closest Chinese-operated port to the American mainland, positioned perfectly in Caribbean shipping lanes with direct access to Gulf of Mexico routes. Chinese vessels service this facility regularly, and there's minimal U.S. oversight of what moves through it. The port handles containers bound for Cuba, but it's also designed as a transshipment hub for the broader Caribbean. Cargo can arrive from China, get redistributed at Mariel, and reach destinations throughout the region without ever touching an American-controlled port. But here's the real concern. Ports have dual-use capabilities that go far beyond commercial shipping. Deep water berths that handle container ships can accommodate other vessel types. Communications, infrastructure installed for logistics can serve other purposes. And Chinese personnel operating the facility have access to data about every ship movement in the region. China didn't just build a port 90 miles from Florida, They established a strategic foothold that gives them eyes on American naval operations and commercial shipping in ways that were unthinkable a decade ago. And while American officials debated what to do about Cuba, China was already moving south to lock down something even more valuable. The Pacific Network, Port of Mejillones, Chile. China didn't just want to ship resources from South America, they wanted to control the entire supply chain from extraction to delivery. And nowhere is that more obvious than at Chile's Port of Mejillones. This northern Chilean facility is where China's strategy of vertical integration reaches its peak. Chinese mining companies extract copper and lithium from Chilean mountains, truck it to Chinese-operated ports, and load it onto Chinese vessels, all without a single non-Chinese entity touching the cargo. Mejillones sits in the Antofagasta region, home to some of the world's richest copper deposits and increasingly important lithium reserves. The port's natural deepwater harbor was already impressive, but Chinese infrastructure investments transformed it into a specialized mineral export terminal. The facility handles bulk minerals with efficiency that matches anything in the world, using loading systems designed specifically for the type of cargo flowing from Chinese-owned mines in the interior. But here's what makes this terrifying from a strategic perspective. China doesn't just operate the port. Chinese companies own the mines, the trucking infrastructure connecting mines to the coast, and the shipping lines that carry minerals across the Pacific. They control pricing, volume, quality standards, and delivery schedules. Chile's critical minerals flow exclusively to Chinese markets because China built a system where no alternative exists. Copper is essential for everything from electrical wiring to renewable energy systems. Lithium powers every electric vehicle battery on Earth. By controlling the port where these minerals leave South America, China guaranteed itself access to resources that modern civilization cannot function without. And they did it so smoothly that most people never noticed it happening. China didn't just buy access to Chilean minerals, they built an end-to-end system that makes them impossible to cut out of the supply chain. But copper and lithium were only part of the plan because China's next target would give them control over Central America's largest gateway, the Central American anchor, Port Cortez, Honduras. While everyone watched South America, China quietly moved into Central America's most important port. Port Cortez in Honduras is the largest port in Central America, and Chinese investment just modernized it with technology that gives China eyes on every cargo movement in the region. The container terminal received Chinese-funded upgrades that transformed it from a regional facility into a hub that rivals anything in North America. The strategic position is what matters here. Cortez sits on Honduras's Caribbean coast, perfectly positioned between North and South America. It's close to the proposed Nicaragua Canal route that China has explored for years. And it gives Chinese operators hands-on experience managing Central American logistics networks, knowledge that becomes invaluable if alternative canal routes ever get built. Chinese technology now runs the terminal operations. The cranes, the software systems, the automation, all designed and installed by Chinese companies. Cargo moving through Central America increasingly flows through infrastructure that China controls, and the data generated by those operations goes straight to Chinese logistics firms. They see trade patterns, shipping volumes, and economic activity across a region that was once exclusively in America's sphere of influence. But here's the bigger play. Port Cortez isn't isolated. It connects to the broader network of Chinese-operated ports spanning the Caribbean and both South American coasts. A container can now move from Peru's Chancay through Central America via Cortez and reach North American markets without ever touching non-Chinese infrastructure. China built alternative trade routes through the Western Hemisphere that bypass every traditional choke point. They didn't just invest in Honduras, they secured another piece of the maritime network that makes Chinese shipping independent of American-controlled routes. And what China did next in Venezuela proved they'd operate anywhere, regardless of politics or sanctions. The Venezuelan strategy, Port of La Guaira. Here's where China's port strategy gets really bold. While Western companies abandoned Venezuela during its economic collapse, China doubled down. Chinese investment poured into Port of La Guaira, Venezuela's main port, upgrading container handling and bulk cargo facilities, even as the country spiraled into crisis. Western sanctions meant nothing to Chinese operators, who saw opportunity where everyone else saw risk. La Guaira handles Venezuela's oil exports, and China is the primary buyer. By controlling port operations, China secured its oil imports regardless of what happens politically in Caracas or Washington. The port kept functioning through government changes, hyperinflation, and international pressure because Chinese operators had no intention of leaving. They upgraded technology, maintained infrastructure, and ensured cargo kept flowing. The northern South American coast position gives China coverage they couldn't get anywhere else. Combined with their Caribbean ports, La Guaira completes a network spanning the entire northern approach to South America. Chinese vessels can now access ports from Cuba to Brazil without depending on facilities outside their control. But here's what this really demonstrates. China's port network functions regardless of political situations that would stop Western operators cold. Economic chaos, sanctions, diplomatic pressure, none of it matters when you control the infrastructure. While American companies need stable governments and favorable diplomatic relations, Chinese port operators simply keep working. They prove their network doesn't just work in friendly countries, it works everywhere, and that makes it nearly impossible to counter. But individual strategic ports were never the end goal, because what China built next turned these separate facilities into something far more powerful. The integration system, coordinated port network. Here's where everything changes. These aren't just random Chinese investments scattered across South America. They're pieces of an integrated system that functions as one massive logistics network. COSCO and China Merchants Port operate multiple facilities across 2 oceans and an entire continent, and they all run on shared technology platforms that coordinate operations in real time. Think about what that means. A container loaded at Mejillones in Chile can be tracked through Chinese systems all the way to Paranaguá in Brazil. Shipping schedules across a dozen ports get optimized simultaneously by Chinese logistics software. Cargo routing decisions get made based on data flowing from every Chinese-operated terminal in the Western Hemisphere. It's not 12 separate ports, it's one distributed megaport spanning an entire continent. The Chinese shipping lines coordinating schedules across these facilities create efficiency that competitors simply cannot match. A vessel leaving Shanghai knows exactly which South American ports have capacity, which routes are fastest, and where cargo needs redistribution, all before it leaves Asia. Western shipping companies operating through non-integrated facilities are flying blind by comparison. But here's the part that should worry everyone. All that shipping data flows to Chinese operators. They see cargo volumes, trade patterns, economic activity, and supply chain bottlenecks across the entire hemisphere before anyone else does. That's not just a commercial advantage, it's strategic intelligence on a scale that's unprecedented. China knows what South America produces, where it goes, and when it ships, because they control the infrastructure that moves it. The network effect multiplies the value of every individual port exponentially. Chancay alone is impressive. Chancay plus Paranaguá plus Kingston, plus 10 other facilities becomes unstoppable. China didn't build ports in South America. They built a parallel shipping system that competes directly with every Western-controlled trade route. And they did it so efficiently that there's no way to match it now. Global trade dominance through strategic positioning. Stand back and look at what China actually built. They have Pacific ports like Chancay and Mejillones, connecting directly to Asia. They control Atlantic ports like Paranaguá and facilities in Argentina securing resource flows. And they operate Caribbean ports from Kingston to Mariel to Cortez that dominate transshipment across the entire region. This is geographic coverage that spans 2 oceans and positions China at every critical choke point for South American trade. The Pacific ports handle the Asia routes that are reshaping global commerce. As South American economies reorient toward Asian markets, every container flowing west moves through Chinese-controlled infrastructure. The Atlantic ports guarantee Chinese access to resources, agricultural products, minerals, and energy supplies that China's economy depends on. And the Caribbean facilities give China control over the redistribution networks that connect North and South America. But here's what makes this truly dominant. China created alternative routes for everything. If the Panama Canal gets congested or blocked, Chinese cargo flows through Caribbean transshipment hubs. If one port faces labor issues or capacity constraints, the network redistributes cargo to other Chinese-operated facilities. There's redundancy built into every major trade route, which means disruptions that would cripple traditional shipping barely affect Chinese operations. Western shipping companies still depend on routes designed 50 years ago. They're stuck using infrastructure built when America dominated global trade. China just bypassed all of it by building new routes optimized for today's trade flows. South American exports that once had to go through Panama or traditional Atlantic routes now have direct paths to Asian markets. And every one of those paths runs through Chinese infrastructure. China's megaports didn't just enter South America, they created a parallel global shipping system that makes China indispensable to world trade, and it's already too late to build anything that competes with it. Now you understand why the US is panicking. China didn't just build impressive ports, they rewrote the rules of global shipping. South America's trade flows are reorienting from Atlantic to Pacific, from north-south routes to east-west connections. And every single one of those new routes runs through Chinese-controlled facilities. The Monroe Doctrine that kept foreign powers out of the Western Hemisphere for 2 centuries just became irrelevant, and American officials watched it happen in real time without any ability to stop it. The engineering achievements speak for themselves. China built megaports in locations where construction seemed impossible, seismic zones, remote coastlines, politically unstable regions, and they did it faster and cheaper than Western companies could have imagined. Chancay went from fishing village to South America's most advanced port in under 4 years. That's the kind of infrastructure development speed that used to be considered fantasy. But speed and engineering prowess aren't what's causing the panic in Washington. It's the strategic reality that China now controls the infrastructure, determining how an entire continent trades with the world. South American resources that American industries depend on flow through ports where Chinese operators see every transaction. Shipping routes that American naval planners assumed they'd always monitor now operate independently of American oversight. And the economic integration between China and South America deepens every day as trade volumes through these ports explode. American officials finally understand they're not competing against individual port investments. They're competing against a fully operational alternative to the global shipping system America built after World War II. And that alternative is already functioning better than the original. Chinese ports are more efficient, more automated, and more strategically positioned than the aging infrastructure serving American trade routes. The time to compete was 10 years ago when China started planning this network. Now the ports are operational, the trade routes are established, and the economic relationships are locked in. The US offered South American countries lectures about governance and demands for political reforms. China offered them ports, and South America chose the ports. American diplomats are still trying to figure out how to respond, while Chinese container ships are already sailing on routes that didn't exist 5 years ago. The panic isn't about what might happen, it's about what already happened while nobody was paying attention. China's megaports across South America and the Caribbean aren't just changing regional trade. They're proving that America lost control of its own hemisphere's economic future. And there's no infrastructure project, diplomatic initiative, or strategic partnership that can undo what's already been built. The ports are operational, the ships are sailing, and the trade routes that define 21st century commerce now run through Chinese infrastructure, whether America likes it or not.